Picture this. The French countryside in the late 1500s. You've got rolling hills, vineyards, and echoes of a country at war with itself. It's a picturesque setting, but a pretty chilling tale unfolds there. A soldier uses the chaos of war to commit awful acts. And an 89-year-old widow, well, she dares to challenge things and demand justice.
It's a story that really shows how tough the human spirit can be. It shows the lengths people will go to, even when things seem impossible, to fight for what they believe in.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to dive deep into today. It's the case of Renée Chevalier. She was the Lady of Shamu, and we're going to talk about her quest to hold a soldier, Mathieu Dion, accountable for crimes against her people, horrific crimes. And the sources we're using for this deep dive are A Widow's Vengeance After the Wars of Religion, Gender and Justice in Renaissance France. It's a fascinating book by Dr. Tom Hamilton.
Oh, yeah, I know that book.
And we're also using a podcast interview with the author. He digs even deeper there and talks about the original trial documents from the 16th century.
Those sources really give us a look into this time period, not just from like an academic view, but we get to really hear from the people who lived through these wild times.
Okay, so to understand how important Chevalier's actions were, we need to understand the French wars of religion. This wasn't just like people disagreeing. This tore France apart. It went on for decades.
Catholics versus Protestants, right, all fighting for power, control, and who gets to be on the throne.
Exactly. And it wasn't a clean war. There weren't clear battle lines or anything.
No, it was brutal. Total chaos. Alliances kept shifting, and the violence, especially in rural places like Shamu, well, it just spilled into everyday life.
Right. And that's where our story begins. The winter of 1590-91, the siege of Paris is happening, everyone's on edge. And Mathieu Dion, he's a soldier fighting for the Protestant king, Henry of Navarre, and he arrives in Chameau.
You know, the thing is, Dion already had a reputation for cruelty, I mean, even before Chameau. It wasn't like war made him go bad or anything.
Oh, so he was already...
Yeah, he had this history of violence, and it just seemed to get worse when he was given power over regular people, civilians.
And it got a lot worse in Chameau. I mean, we're talking about at least 16 rapes, 8 murders, and then tons of theft and just pillaging. But it's the brutality of it all that's just really disturbing.
There's this one story that really sticks with me. It's about a man who Dion tied up like a bundle of wheat, and then he pushed him down a hill.
Oh my God.
And then there was another man beaten so badly, his widow said there wasn't one part of his body that wasn't bruised. This wasn't just violence. It was like planned out cruelty meant to just break these people.
It's hard to even imagine. And then you have Babodi, a woman who was raped publicly in the chateau's great hall. And the villagers, they were forced to watch through a keyhole. It's just awful.
It wasn't just sexual violence, though, right? It was about power, terrorizing the whole community. I mean, that's how rape was used in war. Humiliate and demoralize the enemy, scare everyone.
So you have war. You have this village caught in the middle. Then Dion shows up and unleashes this wave of terror. It all seems pretty hopeless, doesn't it?
You would think the villagers would just suffer in silence. What could they do? He was a soldier fighting for the future king. But that's what's so amazing about this story. They didn't stay quiet.
They found a voice.
Renée Chevalier.
89 years old, a widow, 5 times married, and the Lady of Chameau. She was a woman who knew how to deal with difficult situations. And maybe even more importantly, she knew the legal system.
And that's key here, because she had gone up against powerful people before. She even sued some of her own relatives and won. This was not a woman who was easily intimidated.
Not at all. Chevalier wasn't going to sit back and just watch. She wanted justice no matter what it took.
But you have to remember, this is 16th century France. A woman, a widow, almost 90 years old, going up against a soldier connected to the king. That was unheard of.
Unheard of. So what does she do? She gets 57 witnesses together, charters a boat, and sails to Paris to take her case to court. The time, the money, the risk, just to do that. It's unbelievable.
It shows how much she cared about her people. She was not letting Dion get away with this.
And here's where things get really interesting. The French Wars of Religion had just ended, like a few years before this trial, with the Edict of Nantes in 1598.
Which was supposed to, bring peace, help everyone reconcile after decades of fighting. And a big part of that was an amnesty clause. Basically, they forgave acts committed during the war.
So you'd think that would make it impossible to prosecute Dion, right, even with the horrible things he did.
You would think so. And that's exactly what Dion's lawyers tried to argue. But they didn't count on Chevalier. She knew the law, and she found a loophole right there in the edict.
Okay, now I have to know, What loophole?
Article 86. It granted amnesty for most things done during the war, but it said you could still prosecute excessively cruel crimes. So basically, crimes that were just way too much, even for war.
So this edict that was supposed to bring peace, it actually gave Chevalier a way to get justice. It was a crazy twist.
It shows you that even when you're trying to make peace, you can't just ignore justice. And Chevalier, she was smart. She used this document, meant to protect soldiers like Dion, to hold him accountable.
It's incredible that this edict, meant to, smooth things over, actually helped Chevalier's case.
Yeah.
But how did they prove Dion's actions were excessively cruel? War is brutal, right? So where do you draw that line?
That's what Dion's lawyers were banking on. Their argument was basically, look, it's war, things happen that wouldn't be okay in peacetime, but you gotta understand the situation. They tried to make it seem like Dion was just, a soldier doing his job under tough circumstances.
But Chevalier wasn't buying it.
Nope, not at all. She and her lawyers, they were ready. They knew this was coming. So they built their case to show the specific acts of cruelty, things that went way beyond what was necessary in war. They didn't just focus on what Dion did, but how he did it. The witness testimonies got into all that.
So it wasn't just about the crimes themselves, but the way they were carried out.
Exactly. They showed that this guy, he enjoyed being cruel, took pleasure in hurting people and humiliating them. It wasn't military necessity. It was like this sadistic part of him. That's what the testimonies pointed to.
So the details, like the man pushed down the hill, the public rape of Pabodie, they used that to show a pattern, that this was deliberate cruelty.
Precisely. They weren't saying these were just like accidents of war. They were saying these were planned acts meant to terrify the people and keep them down.
And did that work? Was that effective?
Oh, yeah. Very effective. If you read the court records, you can see how much the testimonies affected the judges. They were moved by what the villagers said. They could see the difference. This wasn't just war stuff. This was something else.
It's amazing to think that these villagers, just regular people, their words helped bring down someone as powerful as Dion.
That's the power of individual voices. Giving people a platform to share their stories, especially when they've suffered. And remember, these people were probably scared to death. Dion was connected to important people. Speaking out against him, that was risky.
Yet they did it anyway.
They did. And that's what's so inspiring. Even when you're afraid, even when someone's trying to intimidate you, the truth can still make a difference. Ordinary people can fight for justice.
It makes you wonder about Chevalier, though. She brought these people together.
Right.
Organized the whole trip to Paris, presented their case. She had to be a strong person.
Oh, for sure. You can see her personality in the trial records. She wasn't just there for show. She was involved in everything, gathering evidence, talking strategy with the lawyers, the whole thing.
I can't imagine how much strength it took for a woman her age, in her position, to take on this fight.
It's unbelievable. Remember, back then, women weren't really allowed in the legal system. They were supposed to, do what their husbands or fathers said. Their voices weren't heard in public life. And here's Chevalier, almost 90, leading this whole legal battle. She challenged everything about the society she lived in.
Do you think maybe being a widow helped her?
Interesting point. Usually, being a widow meant you were vulnerable. But it could also give you some freedom. No husband to tell you what to do. So Chevalier could take on a public role, assert herself in a way she might not have been able to otherwise.
So being a widow, that actually gave her power to fight for justice.
It's a strange twist, right? Society might have underestimated her because she was a widow, but that's exactly what allowed her to act in this way. Nobody expected it.
So we've got the Edict of Nantes, meant to bring peace, but it's what allowed Chevalier to go after Dion. And then you have Chevalier herself using her position as a widow to, challenge the whole system. It all just came together to bring Dion down.
A perfect storm, you might say. But you can't forget, those were just external factors. In the end, it was Chevalier's determination, how much she knew about the law, and her belief in justice that made the difference.
What about the trial itself? How did that all go down?
The trial records are fascinating. You can picture the whole drama in the courtroom. Dion's lawyers were trying to make his actions seem less serious, like he was just following orders, or maybe the witnesses were exaggerating.
But Chevalier's team was ready.
Right. Absolutely. They knew those arguments were coming. They had counter-arguments ready. Witnesses backed each other up. They showed how consistent and detailed their stories were.
So it wasn't just random accusations. They were building a real case.
Exactly, brick by brick.
Right.
They used the testimonies to show how cruel Dion was. They were really good at it, too.
Dion had powerful friends, though. Didn't he try to use them to get out of this?
He did. He got important people to vouch for his character, tried to make Chevalier and the villagers look bad, like they were just unhappy peasants who wanted to get back at him for something.
But that didn't work.
Not ultimately. That's where Chevalier's own connections and her understanding of how society worked came in. Her late husband, he had been a well-respected military man. That helped her credibility. And she was a respected figure in the community. She used all of that to counter Dion's attacks.
So it was more than just a legal battle. It was about social influence, too. Who had the better reputation?
Exactly. That's something people forget about history sometimes. It wasn't always about who had the best lawyer or the most evidence. It was also about who you knew, who would support you, and who could control how people saw the case.
And Chevalier, she won that part of the battle, too.
She did. She knew how to play the game, and she played it really well.
So what happened in the end? What was the verdict?
After weeks of testimony, arguments, back and forth, the court decided Maran Dion was guilty. Guilty of excessively cruel crimes.
I bet the villagers were relieved to finally see justice after everything they'd been through.
It must have been such a release for them. Not only was their abuser punished, but the court believed them. They saw that their experiences were real.
Dion was a soldier for the king, though. Henry IV. Didn't that save him?
It didn't. And that's what's so remarkable about this case. It shows that even back then, even when the powerful could usually do whatever they wanted, the truth could win out.
It shows that the law applied to everyone. Even people with powerful friends could be held accountable.
Absolutely. Nobody is above the law. And justice, even though it's hard to get sometimes, can still happen, even in the most difficult situations.
What about Dion's punishment? What did they do to him?
He was sentenced to death, executed soon after the trial.
Wow. That's a powerful ending to this story.
It is. But we can't forget that this isn't just some interesting story from the past. This is relevant to us, even today.
It's hard to imagine. Going back to life after that trial, I mean, those villagers went through so much.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to heal after all that trauma? And then they had to relive it all in court.
That's a good question. It makes you think about, how trauma affects people, especially sexual violence. Even when you get justice, when the person is punished, it doesn't just make everything okay. It doesn't take away the pain, the scars.
These villagers, they saw the worst of humanity. They fought for justice, and then they had to somehow rebuild their lives. It says a lot about the human spirit.
It really does. And we can't forget about Chevalier. She was more than just, a legal mind. She was a leader, a symbol of hope for those people. Seeing her fight so hard, that must have given them strength, like a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. She showed them that even after something so awful, there's still hope for justice, for someone to be held accountable, and for healing.
It makes you wonder, though, did this case change anything, the way people thought about violence during war? Especially sexual violence. Did it make a difference?
That's interesting. It's hard to know for sure, but maybe.
Yeah.
It was a high-profile case, a shocking verdict. Maybe it got people talking about these things in a different way.
Maybe it was like a warning to other soldiers, like, hey, there are limits, even in war. Or maybe it gave other victims the courage to come forward, knowing that justice, even though it's hard, is still possible.
To think that this one case, all because a few people were brave enough to speak up, that it could have changed things in a bigger way.
That's the thing about courage, isn't it? Even small acts can have a huge impact, and it can last for a long time.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We've seen brutality, yes, but also incredible resilience, determination, and people fighting for justice no matter the odds. What sticks with you most from this case?
For me, it's Renée Chevalier, just who she was. She was a woman who broke all the rules. She was smart. She was a powerful voice for her community, and she gave people hope when things were really dark. She reminds us that even when things seem impossible, we can still overcome them. The human spirit is strong.
It also reminds us that history is full of amazing stories. Stories that make us question what we think we know. Stories that help us understand the past better. And stories that inspire us to be brave and stand up for what we believe in today.
Absolutely. Stories like this remind us to look deeper, go beyond the surface. There are so many hidden gems in history, just waiting to be discovered.
This has been fascinating, and I hope our listeners will check out the sources we talked about today. There's so much more to learn about this incredible story, and who knows what other amazing historical stories are out there. So until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep.